Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. I guess it's still light outside, so I'm going to say afternoon. On behalf of the Center for Africana Studies and in collaboration with Wharton Sports Analytics and Business Initiative and Wharton CEO, I'm pleased to welcome you to Race in Sports. This annual event interrogates the intersection of race, sports, business, and activism and is purposefully scheduled to coincide with the Penn Relays. This year, we're pleased to welcome entrepreneur, journalist, host, and Emmy Award-winning producer Bomani Jones. Bomani has been a sharp and insightful cultural critic since he began writing for AOL Black Voices in the early 2000s. His early writing led to an important friendship and mentorship with the late Ralph Wiley, a highly regarded journalist for Sports Illustrated and ESPN's Page 2. Since that time, Jones has traversed a variety of platforms, offering interesting takes that intersect race, sports, entertainment, history, and culture. He currently hosts HBO's Game Theory with Bomani Jones and is a contributor to the HBO sports series Back on the Record with Bob Costas. He also hosts The Right Time with Bomani Jones podcast on ESPN and The Evening Jones, an audience-driven podcast. Bomani graduated from Clark Atlanta University in 2001 with a bachelor's degree in economics. He's also earned master's degrees in politics, economics, and business from Claremont Graduate University and in economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Bomani will be in conversation with my colleague, Kenneth Shropshire, David H. Hauck Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School and Emeritus Professor of Africana Studies. Shropshire founded and directed the Wharton Sports Business Initiative and led the sports-focused executive education programs. He also developed a course, Race and the Global Sports Business, and has written numerous related books, most recently The Miseducation of the Student Athlete, How to Fix College Sports. Like Tom Brady, Ken retired from Penn and founded the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University. Now I'm getting there. Because you retired from Penn and you went and played somewhere else. And then this past summer, he unretired and returned to Wharton to serve as senior advisor to the dean for the Coalition for Equity and Opportunity. Race in Sports provides a forum for a wide range of figures from the sports world, including Katrina Adams of the USTA, Tina Sloan Green from the Black Women's Sports Foundation, former NFL player Kellen Winslow, Todd Boyd, Harry Edwards, Stephen A. Smith, Marion Jones, Olympic athlete Wyoming Attias, Sonny Vaccaro, Anita DeFrance, Tommy Smith, and John Carlos. This year's reboot of Race in Sports is part of our year-long celebration of 50 years of Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bomani Jones and Ken Shropshire.
Thanks, Camille. Hello, everybody. We got a lively audience here. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to do this, and got a bunch of questions, and then we're going to open it up at the end and hear what I haven't asked and should have asked. And the introduction just struck me. I'm thinking about Ralph Wiley, and I really haven't thought about Ralph for a while. And those of you who don't Google him now, but those of you who don't know who he is, I mean, really, he's such an important man overall, but in the sports realm and the idea of how we talk and think about sport. And he's got a couple of great books too. I mean, what black people should do now, why black people shout, kind of all this kind of thinking that wasn't anticipated from a sports person at the time. I met Ralph, how old is this guy? I met him in the 80s. He was working with the Oakland Tribune and kind of the black orbit of sports writers, and was covering, among other things, boxing. I was doing a lot of work with boxing. And you talk about a guy who just, the mentorship thing is what I was wondering about, just stayed in touch. And we were both I was in the business law side of sport, and he's doing the writing stuff. We'd encounter each other at places where we were the only two black people in the room. And then I watched him a lot from afar, just in territories that we hadn't even encountered. And then we lost him just far, far too early.
Yeah,
So
I remember, because I never got to meet him in person. We had a very digital sort of relationship. but I talked to him the day before he died. Like I remember just looking up and it was just like, wait, what do you mean Ralph Wiley's dead? And so for those unfamiliar, I can help you a little bit with what the Google would give you. Ralph, I think he graduated a degree in business administration from Knoxville College, a very small HBCU, and wound up in Oakland and was a copy boy for the paper and then convinced them to let him write and then became a columnist for the Oakland Tribune, which is, we have so many media outlets now that the idea of somebody becoming a columnist at any level, like the magnitude of that, I think is not the easiest to convey. The magnitude of a black person becoming a columnist, I think may be even more difficult to convey, but particularly in sports, where we just are horribly underrepresented in the media generally, but to get to that place of being a columnist and to be so wildly influential. Like at the time, Billy Martin was the manager of the Oakland A's and they played a real small ball kind of thing, a lot of bunts, a lot of running, and he dubbed it Billy Ball. And that became the thing. That became the name for what the whole thing was. And somebody had actually asked Ralph about it, like, you should have trademarked this. But he's like, no, that's not really how this works, right? Like you put the words out there, they kind of go. I would have trademarked it. He did not, but that was him. So in '82, he gets a job at Sports Illustrated, and what Sports Illustrated was then was like the magnitude of Time magazine or something like that. Like this was the definitive sports Bible of the time. And I am pretty sure he was the first black staff writer at Sports Illustrated. And even if he wasn't, to be a black dude in 1982 writing for Sports Illustrated was bigger than I can really convey and explain. Let's fast forward to 1991. There's a gentleman named Rocket Ismail from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, for what it's worth. Expected to be the #1 pick in the draft, was very much so a phenomenon. Ralph had put together Team Rocket, which was like agents, marketing people, everything else to handle Rocket Ismail's career. Sports Illustrated comes and says, so you can't really do that while you work here, which is a perfectly reasonable point to make, right? Like that's a huge conflict of interest thing. So it's like, you either stop this or you quit your job. And so he quit his job. And the courage that sort of thing were to take, like that is a dream job. And he was just like, nah, no thanks. So what happens after that is he writes these books. He writes Why Black People Tend to Shout, what black people should do now ultimately comes later. He wrote Johnny Cochran's memoir after the trial as he was in LA when all those things were going on. He and Spike Lee had been working on, I believe it was a television version of He Got Game. Like he had this broad mind and his ability to do all of these things at a time where now, what's the nonsensical term my agents use? Multi-hyphenate. That is the Hollywood term that they use for everybody. It's kind of like this intro. He's an entrepreneur, journalist, every other thing that we could possibly throw on a list, right? Ralph is kind of the OG of that for people in sports writing. And so for me, it was such an honor to have just the opportunity to go back and forth with him about various things that I was working on. And then after he died, I realized I don't know how he had the time in the day because I thought I was special. There was about 55 people who had like the same exact story of, wow, Ralph was so good to me and answered all my emails. I was like, oh, he answered your emails too, huh? Ain't that something? But he's just a majestic figure.
Last time I saw him, we were in Manhattan coming from, somebody had a book book signing, and he came and he had this, like I said, kind of this core of fans, because everybody kind of, how's this brother doing this and that? But these were just regular guys. And Brother Wiley, can I get your number? He said, only if you use your mind and memorize it. And then he says the number as he keeps walking by. But he'd always do stuff like that to just kind of, I'm gonna stretch you every possible
way. He was a star, man. And if this is what I say, if you want to Google Ralph Wiley, there is a column on ESPN.com's page 2 called White Lies. And I think it's something like 10 years after the O.J. Simpson trial. And it is the best piece of sports writing that I have ever read and maybe that you will ever read at any point. Like, I recommend checking that one out.
So how do we get, and thanks for taking that detour, but I think it's important. It's part of, as I was hearing the names of people that we've talked to over the years, there's just so much that's been conveyed in these conversations that I'm hoping, especially, sorry for you old heads, but hoping young people hear and realize the foundations of all this and where people like this man come from. And 9 times out of 10, they know that history of how, who came before, who plowed the field before. So I want to talk some about kind of this role of sport in society and try to hear where Bomani is in terms of that broadly. Talk specifically about, my people tease me about making sure I do this women in sport and talk about where things are now with that. Certainly dived deep into race in sports, and then some of the currents, NIL and the drafts going on today and through the week, and things like that. But yeah, just broadly start off. How did sport become or inherit this role or get this role of you're responsible for all this stuff in society, and we're going to look to you in terms of how we can be better, how everything has to be with sport, the Jackie Robinson moment. Is that a good, bad thing? Where are you with that?
So I think there are two, as I hear that, what jumps to my mind is that I think there are two fundamental things that you have to think about as to why sports, for lack of a better term, matter. And when I say why they matter, I don't mean simply why people care about them, but why is it that just about every foundational institution in nearly every society in the world promotes this, right? It's not just like everybody likes to play games. Every country's got a team under its banner. Like the whole idea of the Olympics is to spell out the idea that participation in this and the values and virtues that come from it are something that are better for a broader society, right? Now, normally when we're talking about it, we're talking in the context of team sports, and team sports reinforce ideas of sacrifice, right? The greater good, that there's some greater purpose to what it is that you're doing that is bigger than yourself, which is something that most institutions and most group foundations are trying to put forth, is that idea that this is not just about you. But even with individual sports where it is just about you, it also then becomes about this quest for greatness and this quest for perfection and just the inherent value of hard work that, for reasons both noble and sinister, serves both the society at large and the people on top of the society who really would like you to work hard at whatever it is that you were doing and probably making them some measure of money, right? So we start there with why it is that these games are put forth before our society and promoted to everyone as something that is good or something that can make you better, if nothing else. The second part of it that I think is very important is sports have historically been a celebration of traditional ideas of masculinity. Now, we could argue about the health of that, what's good, what's bad about that, but when you think about issues of sport and gender and what is popular, what is not, what are the issues that come up and become controversial, when you start with the understanding that the point of this for a lot of people is to celebrate the idea of masculinity, and particularly when you talk about team sports, people really get off on a bunch of dudes dressed the same. I don't care if it's the cops, I don't care if it's the military, I don't care who it is. If a bunch of men start walking around in uniform, even people who find these ideas to be totally ridiculous will stop and pay attention and look and try to figure out what in the world is going on. I don't think it's an innate thing. I think it is a very cultured, socialized sort of idea. But that is how this goes. And so if there's anything that all of these societies love more than they should, it's men. And so anything that's going to put forth the idea of the goodness of man, that is what people look for in sports. And so I think because of that, what people expect from it is that sports would be reflective of something larger and something better, because it then gives us the impression that we ourselves are better, that we ourselves are larger. And with American sports in particular, you take all of that and then you bring in the variable of race and what role race plays in different sports and at different points. So with Jackie Robinson, for example, Major League Baseball integrates ahead of the United States military. It is, in a lot of ways, the test balloon for those institutions to see, hey, maybe this whole thing won't all fall apart if the black people interact with the white people. Now, of course, the thing with baseball was, I was talking to my buddy Howard Bryant about this, the really reason they didn't want to integrate baseball in the field is because they were worried about integrating baseball in the stands. The black people were going to show up, and that was the thing that they did not want. But as we then take it and try to project it into these larger things, baseball then looks like what some of the more progressive-minded people then would have thought it could be. Right? What could be. And that exists in part also because people view sports, and while there are certainly exceptions to this, it's probably as close to a legitimate meritocracy on the field, at least, as you're going to find, because the stakes are too high and everything is quantifiable, right? There's not a whole lot of excuses that you could write off. So I was thinking about with the pandemic. The person that I felt real bad for when the pandemic first hit is the dude that's at Procter & Gamble or one of these companies that owns a zillion different things. Whoever's the vice president of hand sanitizing, he's showing up at the meeting like, dog, we are killing this shit. You would never believe. But what did you do? Well, we came up with a new hand sanitizing formula. Make up all kinds of stuff when in reality was people needed hand sanitizer now because he thought we were going to die. Okay, cool. But the vice president for like cold and cough medicine, nobody's going out and catching colds anymore. Your stuff isn't any good. Now you got to come in here and explain, well, why are the numbers so low? And it's really not your fault, right? There's nothing you can do. But it's also not about the greatness of the VP of hand sanitizer that they now making moves. Sports doesn't really work that way. Like you can go on the wins and losses and you can say, okay, well, I got some excuses here and there or whatever. But in terms of actual individual performance in that stuff, we can look at it right there and see what you did. There ain't a lot of ways that you can go about it. There ain't a lot of ways that you can spin it and turn it into something else. People can see it right there. That is what you did. And people of all stripes, now, whether they actually want a meritocracy is its own discussion, but they all think they do.
So, as you were talking about how this all came about and the idea of masculinity, which is, you read the history of football especially, and the idea of why sport was put in schools. A lot of this is Teddy Roosevelt and kind of the turn of that century moment of, we got a bunch, it may sound familiar, we got a bunch of weak men. We need to find ways to ultra-masculinize them. I don't even know what the phrasing would be. And that's a lot of why football began to take the lead. But it is interesting in that moment, it's that 1903 kind of era when baseball comes together and says, no more blacks. And I don't know if there's a correlation with that. And then, it took football a little while longer, but football wasn't advanced. So 1930s, football says no more blacks. And we had, this is the old segregation kind of story, but Negro Leagues thrive, HBCUs thrive. How does losing that, or do we have some version of what we had still in sport from that moment where there was these great black institutions that don't exist in the same way now, although we'll talk about Dion in a minute.
We will.
But both in terms of, and I also want to get to the ownership issue too. I mean, how do we recapture some of the power that we had then that was taken away in this masculinity moment? Yeah,
well, see, I think the difficulty with reclaiming the power is that the source of the power was something that we don't want to go back to, right? Like the source of the power was in fact segregation. And I remember I was reading, I think it was Collis Temple. Collis Temple Jr. was the first basketball player at LSU. And I think he was 1970 is when he played. And his explanation for why he ultimately decided to go to LSU was, well, this is the best school in our state and I have the opportunity to go. Therefore, why would I not go to the best school in the state? Now, the question becomes whether or not the best school in the state is necessarily the best school for you. Like, I am sure that most of you believe that where we are is the best school in this particular city, state, wherever it is, but I know for a fact it wouldn't have been the best place for me, right? Like, as a personal fit, this probably wouldn't have been my bag. With the segregated era, like, you look back and see, like, just what the football talent was, for example, at HBCUs in the 50s, 60s, and even through the 1970s where Jackson State had 3 Hall of Famers on the team at the same time. Well, why did they have 3 Hall of Famers at the team? Because the other schools still hadn't really come around on this black people thing. And if you were a black person, sure, I'll go to the school where they wave the stars and bars every game. Yeah, I feel right at home. No, ain't nobody doing that, right? But I always wonder in those times how many of those athletes would have still gone to HBCUs in the presence of an alternative. And I'm not judging anybody if they would or would not. I just wonder that. Like we talk about going back to the salad days of, to those eras and the power that it gave the black institutions. Well, what it did was give the black institutions a lot of talent because they didn't have the ability to go somewhere else. But where it comes up and and we'll get more to Deion later, but let's hypothetically say that all the great high school athletes now go to black colleges. They will now go from being exploited by a primarily white institution to being exploited by a primarily black institution. I think that people have a dream of sorts that, well, if they were dealing with their own people, they would treat them better. You ever worked for a black person before? Any black people here ever worked for a black person before? Did it feel that much different? Like, you know, it might not say like the same level of like sideways shit where you got to be looking back over like, yo, what you trying to say, right? Like, you don't have that, but it's still working for somebody, right? It's still the same dynamics of capitalism. Like, all of that winds up being the case. The only thing that would be different is that black people were in charge. But with college sports, it becomes interesting because the money in college sports is based on the ways that people feel about the schools. And so we could get all the black players at the black colleges, and people are like, well, then they'll have to come and they'll have to give us all the TV deals. Wow. I never heard anybody talk about in 1957 that everybody was running to watch the HBCU game of the week on television. They wouldn't do that. It wouldn't go that way. They'd go to keep rooting for whatever teams that they root for because they're primarily there to root for the teams and the demand for the talents because they all want to beat each other. But if they then just made the decision, it's just all white boys against your white boys, they'd just be like, well, we'll get the best white boys we can. And then they'll put it on television and then they'll watch it. And so I always feel like we need to be careful when we talk about like redirecting these things to black institutions, that it then requires a real monitoring of what those institutions themselves are going to do and how those institutions are going to treat people. Discussion comes up about black ownership in professional sports. Number one, people are going to need to come to terms with the reality is it's not going to happen anytime soon. And the reason it's not going to happen anytime soon, and this is something I don't think people realize. I think both Major League Baseball and the NFL have this requirement. You got to be 30% liquid of the sale price in order to buy a team. So if we are talking about the Washington Commandos, who I think are probably going to get sold for somewhere between $6.5 and $7 billion, you got to have over or somewhere around $2.5 billion liquid. Go look it up. How many black people got $2 billion sitting in the bank? How many black people are worth $2 billion? I think there are 8 black billionaires in America, and you know the names of 6 of them. Rihanna, Tyler Perry, you know, LeBron James, Jay-Z, Dr. Dre, like you can name them. Ain't none of them got $2 billion laying around in the bank. Yeah. You know, so like the level, the throes of capitalism on this have gotten so strong that we're not going to be able to get there anytime soon. But let's say that we did get there. Byron Allen is the name of somebody that people looked at as maybe being able to buy a team. I do enough work in entertainment. You go talk to some people that work for Byron Allen, and you tell me if they'll think it's a celebration that he gets to own the team. Most of you are probably too young. Bob Johnson owned a basketball team. The stories I've heard about what Bob Johnson was doing when he was owning that team that I don't feel quite comfortable repeating are amazing. But if you talk to anybody that ever worked at BET, go ask them if they were like, yo, I sure hope Bob Johnson gets to buy something again. They're not, you know? And so where sports discussion generally, I find it to be somewhat lacking, and I think it becomes really important to talk about in the context of black people, really is like, as long as this is capitalism, what comes on the back end of it? And so I would like in some ways for us to figure out ways to get some power in this, but the power is in the power that labor possesses. And where I feel like in sports, the power can come is there are enough guys that make enough money that they can afford to miss some checks and really grind something out. But we've yet to see that happen, like even once, like a for real deal fight that you thought could change something. We still haven't seen that go down, and that's a big deal.
It's, you know, I keep bringing the history stuff up, but, you know, Donald Sterling bought the Clippers in the 80s for $13.5 million. I mean, we could have figured out how to get together 13.5.
Yes.
Yeah. But now it's impossible. I mean, you're absolutely, now it's impossible. So it's, because so many of the 7-8 billionaires that we have, they have 1 billion.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
It is just,
they got a billion.
It's just typical. I made it, but then, you know, can't buy a team yet. So what do we aspire to then within, you know, what does equity look like at the highest level in sport? I mean, if you say face the reality, should we just face that, and then what is it that we can hope for?
For me, I think that what one would at least hope that equity would look like in sports. And again, in talking about the idea of sports as meritocracy and where it gets to be important because this is so bottom line oriented, you would just at least hope that in a world with scoreboards, that people would really just say to themselves, you know, I should probably just get the best person for insert job here. You would think the stakes would be that high, and the stakes are generally that high on the field, except for the stuff that white people want to keep. Like quarterback, for example, the decision was made, right? They gave up on all the fast stuff, right? Like, no, we can't do that. They even gave up on most of the fat people positions now. You go look at the offensive line now. They used to be the place they let the dudes hang out. No, that started to require a little bit more speed, and white people got a real self-esteem issue when it comes to speed. They just don't believe they're capable of it. You're not going to explain to me how you can always find a tight end that's fast enough, but ain't no white dude in the world fast enough to play corner. It's just not possible. It's in your mind. Free yourselves. That's just where it comes down to, and so you see that, but then with quarterback, where we still see it's still a battle and still a struggle for legitimate racial equity on that front. In coaching, it's still a battle for equity on those fronts. And all you got to do is make decisions that make sense. It's the only thing you have to do. Like tonight, the draft, this dude named Will Levis is quarterback in the draft. I'm going to be honest with you. I got no idea if Will Levis is any good. I just know that all the way up through the draft, everybody said he was the fourth best. And if you got 4 quarterbacks in the draft, and it's those other 3 dudes and 1 Will Levis, and they telling you that Will Levis is number 4, he's number 4. If the 3 black dudes are getting 1, 2, 3, and they saying the white dude is 4th, trust me, he's 4th. Woke up yesterday talking about this man might be the number 1 pick in the draft. Like in the end, it sounded like people just like, well, what are we doing? Guys, we're overreacting here, aren't we? And we just still see in so many ways people talk themselves out of things that make sense. I mean, that's the story of American racism. It's not like American racism has actually made white people money. It's not like it's made the country richer or better. It's just kind of hoarding things for yourself because you think it's the best thing to do. And so what we could hope for, and this is just where I always feel like if the players were in a better initial position, where they are in a lot of ways the most powerful black people that are around, and they could stand on some of these things and make them happen. But it's also easy for me to say, sitting right here, where I don't have nobody in my life that I got to take care of. Like when I got a little money, I didn't have to, there was no expectation I had to buy my parents a house. They had one. Right. There was nobody hitting me up like, hey man, need a little something for this, that, and the third. I didn't have that. These guys come from different places, and it changes that.
Yeah, you mentioned white defensive backs. I mean, I think Jason Sehorn I thought about right away.
Hold on, let me stop you right there. I have a theory about this. And this is something that I think a lot of people can relate to on a number of fronts. If you look at the NFL, every now and then, there'd be some white lightning dude, right? They all were called white lightning when they were in high school. Every single one of them had the same nickname. But it'll be a dude like Cooper Kupp is an example that comes up. Adam Thielen is a dude for the older people in the house. Don Beebe of the Buffalo Bills. But you think about like the super fast white dudes in your head. Just about all of them have one thing in common. They all grew up in middle of nowhere places where there were nothing but white people, which is to say there was no black person for them to then look at and be like, oh, he must be faster, and then put them there. Like they had to be in an atmosphere and in an environment where it was only white people. Right? And then somebody could believe in you. It's kind of like why I went, like me going to an HBCU and why I worked there better. There were people that were more likely to believe in what I was capable of. It kind of goes in the other direction. Once you bring black people around, then all the white dudes just get slow.
Yeah. I just, for my therapy, just one thing. my entire football career ended. I grew up in the Crenshaw area in LA, and our last high school game was against a school, North Hollywood, which was a white school, and our black school unveils a banner on game day that says, "A Black Day for North Hollywood." So we were really kind of racially inappropriate, I guess, is the way we put it. Fast forward to I get to college and have never run against a white guy in my life, and they set you up to run 40s. And I run this 40 against this white guy who happened to have played for North Hollywood. And I just remember him turning his head, looking back at me in the race. I still haven't gotten over that moment. But it is, because in your head, it's not supposed to happen.
And I tell you, I bet he loved every time he did. Like, I always imagine, like, I can't imagine what it's like for those white dudes every time. They're like, yeah, I know what you think.
He didn't point, though. He didn't point
Yeah.
or anything. He did look back, though.
Yeah, yeah, he's just like, yeah, you thought, huh? You thought. Like, for the younger people watching this, you will never believe this, but if you watch Sunday Night Football, the broadcast of Chris Collinsworth was a legend in the state of Florida, because he was the fastest dude in the state. Like, he was the 100-meter sprint champion. I always say when he's on television, I don't know how many young people would, guess that he was not just a wide receiver, but that he was like super ridiculous fast. But he was like a ghost. And they said whenever he would go to these track meets, all these people would show up because they just heard about this mythically fast white dude. And they just couldn't believe it, and they had to see it for themselves. And all the black dudes were like, well, he couldn't be that fast. Then he dusted all their asses, every single one of them.
So let's talk about Deion for a moment, then I do want to talk about women's sports. And I want to talk about Deion specifically in this context of what power we can have in these sports. So if we can't get to the very top, then this head coaching job. So this is head coach in college, Power 5 kind of school. So there's something there, and Deion gets it. I read today that he has been calling guys into his office and saying, you're cut. I mean, telling them to get into the transfer portal, which I just find, for young men, just an unbelievable, I don't know what words he's actually using. He's saying bring your playbook or how dramatic it is, but making it just like the pros. And I'm thinking, well, I'm glad Deion's got the job, but this is not helping us.
No, well, Deion is trying to help Deion. To be fair, I mean, which is what he's done at every turn. And my problem with Deion has really never been that Deion's just trying to help Deion. Just don't try to tell me you're doing something else. Right? Like, I have a respect for the sociopath who is honest about the fact that that's what he's doing. Just don't tell me you're doing it for me, right? Don't tell me that you're doing this for something bigger. Now, to be fair to Deion, what he's doing is not out of line with what's happening just about everywhere else. He's just being a bit more naked about the way that he is going about it. Like, he walked in the door and said, most of you guys aren't going to be here, and then it's just gradually run all the guys off that he did not want and brought in the people that he did want. And what bothers me about that, whether it's him or anybody else who engages in this, is, like, my parents are college professors. I've taught in a few, like, I grew up on college campuses, basically. Like, the idea and the role that the academy plays in the lives of the students is very, very important to me. And this transfer portal thing, these dudes overwhelmingly are not going to play professional sports. It's just not going to happen. And they're all making these moves and transferring, just trying to find some place to play, because the dream is still there of playing professional at some point. And they just feel like, if I can get to this right place, then I'll be able to showcase it. I got news for you. Overwhelmingly, if you got to go somewhere else to play, you're probably not going to make it to the NFL, right? Like, if you couldn't get your spot at Colorado, wherever it is, the NFL is probably not going to happen for you. But what worries me about it, they made it such that the players can now transfer and play right away without having to sit a year, which used to be the rule, which I approved of because the coaches were able to do that. And I always say that these people are old enough as adults where they're allowed to make whatever bad decision that they want to make. Like, we can't enforce good decision making upon people. But what are you getting bouncing from school to school to school to school? Like, the value that you get from going to college really is social development. That's more important than any of the academic stuff, no matter what anybody tells you. Social development is the number one thing that you get in, like, growing up, becoming an adult with some guardrails. Like, that's the most important part. And you come at it with, like, the people you know, and if you want to view the people a bit more cynically, the networks that you develop. You can't do that bouncing place to place all the time, right? If you're a kid that comes to Colorado and now you love it, and now the man's telling you, all right, but you got to go now. Like, that's rough. Where's this next place that you go going to be? Is that place actually going to be good for you? And what I do think is more prevalent now than ever is viewing these athletes as commodities for the success of the football program with almost a secondary concern for who they ultimately become as people. Because if you got 85 scholarship players on your college football team, even at Alabama, more than half that team is not going to go to the league. So what is their life going to be, and how can football help serve them in their lives? And I think that Deion is just completely removed anything that is non-football from the equation. Again, he's not alone in this, but if the black coach at Colorado is going to behave in ways that are reminiscent of every other white man that we've ever seen in the position, then what's the point? This is kind of the Clarence Thomas principle. Like, yes, we did have a black Supreme Court justice there for 30 straight years, but it was him. What did that do for us? It's a fair question, you know?
Yeah, if you read today, 50-some players have gotten in the transfer portal at Colorado versus an average of 20
They have
at other
70
schools.
available spots on the roster. I promise you, they had a football team last year. Like, they stunk, but they had players. They all out.
But I can only imagine, you got to go, son. You're not going to play here next. And just 18, 19, 20-year-old young men. I mean,
Maybe he did it like that scene from Menace to Society where he just started reading a verse from the Bible. You know what I'm saying? No, granddad. Son, you got to go.
So to change up a little bit, women's sports. This has been characterized as a fabulous year, and the NWSL and the WNBA, and then the women's Final Four and the like. What's your perspective on where we are with this whole development of women's sports?
Yeah, so we did an episode of Game Theory with a long essay about the women's NCAA tournament. And our big point in that was how financially undervalued the tournament was. And there are a whole number of reasons for that. But part of it is the NCAA never approached it as though it was something that would ever be able to make money. So it's thrown in this bundle of sports that they sell to ESPN and the other TV networks with a bunch of other stuff like field hockey, like all the kind of stuff, all that stuff that come on ESPN that you watch if you know somebody that's doing it, right? And the women's tournament was just bundled into all of that. They were undervaluing it by something like hundreds of millions of dollars over a span of time because they just never thought of it as something that people would ultimately find interesting. Now, to me, and this gets back to where we talk about sports as the celebration of masculinity, there are sports that women play where the women's side of things is more popular than the men's side. The ones that jump to my mind are now in America tennis. They grew to that place with tennis. Gymnastics, figure skating, where traditional femininity is out front. Like if they feel like they're watching women be women, they can go for it, for lack of a better term. Forgive me, I don't, just want to get the point across to you. Then people can get down with it. It doesn't challenge any such notion. Now, women's basketball is a little interesting because that's women being all kinds of women. If you ever go to a club and you wind up with a section with a WNBA player or near a WNBA player, you're going to see every piece of humanity walk in and out of there. There is no template for who a female basketball player is in this society. Like if you want to have your idea of the broadest cross-section of American life that you could look at, you look at a women's college basketball game and you'll see every bit of it. To the point where I've always wanted to do something like, what do your shorts say about you? Like the ways that women wear their uniforms, because once you bring femininity into this traditionally masculine space, it's going to be expressed in different ways and people are going to go about it in all their different ways. And so what has happened though with women's college basketball is men's college basketball has nothing that's left that's familiar to anybody because the players aren't there long enough. So for those of us who remember college basketball from the 80s or 90s, we had all these dudes who played who were never going to play in the NBA, but we know them, we know their names. Like off the top of my head, Alex Dillard played for Arkansas. Dude was 5'11", had shorts all the way down to his knees, and I can go to all kinds of rooms. We could talk about him forever because we watched him for years. Like when I grew up hating Duke to the core of my soul, I knew it all the way down to the ninth man because they were on TV. They were there for years. Now these cats come, they stay for a year, and they go. There's no familiarity for the viewer. The brands don't stand for anything really anymore because the personnel market is so transient. Women's ball, completely different at this point. The reason is there's no money for them to go chase. I recommend you get a degree, ma'am, right? Like you ought to get yourself ready for the rest of your life. I think you ought to stick around here for 4 years and, keep your eyes on the prize, right? But as a result, these women stay. They keep playing. You get to know them. You become familiar with them. All the heart stuff that we care about in sports that can often get lost, it's all still there. So what has now happened is, in women's basketball in particular, it is a more compelling product than men's college basketball is. And the level of play has gone up so much because of the increased emphasis on women's sports and more money being put into it. And as much as we like watching dudes dunk and everything else, and that was the argument about, we don't watch women's basketball because they can't dunk or whatever it is. Yeah, but most of the other stuff about basketball isn't that gender specific. Like, I don't know of anything that would make a man better at dribbling, for example, than a woman would be. Like, there's strength issues with shooting and stuff like that. But the games themselves, watching the women's tournament this year, they were so much more interesting. The environment around it is also so much healthier because people ain't making as much money off of it. The stakes aren't nearly as high. People aren't as invested in unhealthy ways as viewers in it. And so when you watch it, you're just like, I don't think I watched a full game for the men's tournament. And I watched so many of those games in the women's tournament because they have a legitimately superior product at this point. And I think that we are now in the midst of the first generation who will be able to watch women's sports and view it that way. Like, it's the first time that it's really been that widely available. And so what we saw with like the Caitlin Clark thing, the Angel Reese and everything that came around it though, but we had stars that people knew. We had stars that people had some, even if you didn't watch women's basketball all the time, at the very least a name you'd heard of. Yeah. Then you'd be like, oh, okay, I know who that person is, or you can lie. Right? So they're, oh, yeah, Leah Boston, hell yeah, she cold. But you could at least do it. And that's a huge change that's come about. And I really want to see how it goes in the next 10 years because the television contract is going to open up. And so there's going to be more money poured into it. But the problem, of course, is when his putting more money into anything actually made it better. That's the fear. Like, we are going to show up to your party. We're probably going to fuck some stuff up.
So I want to connect that up with something else I've been thinking about. I mean, the idea of, what's wonderful about what you described is, and they're going to be coming back next year. We're going to see these players again, which we don't see in the men's game anymore, which is what old school, again, which is what we did see with Kareem.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, we saw him, he's got to play 4 years, couldn't play freshman year, could only play 3. And where's he going to go is kind of the drama of that. And you really invested in this guy. I mean, there were others too. I mean, Russell for another generation, right. Same thing, USF. Chamberlain to a lesser degree. I'm wondering why Kareem especially, I mean, Bill, Russell too, Chamberlain less so, they don't end up in that conversation of the greatest. I mean, it seems to be a two-horse race. Is that generational? And is there a generation that invested in Kareem or invested in Russell in a way that doesn't matter anymore?
Yeah, so I think that part of it is generational. I think the other part of it is the Will Chamberlain line, nobody roots for Goliath, right? And he was Goliath. So basketball basically has 2 eras that are really, I'd say, pre-1976 and post. And the split there, Adam McKay, who I work with on my HBO shows, directed a bunch of stuff. He did a really interesting podcast series called Death on the Wing that did this really fascinating parallel between the American drug war and the shift of basketball to the wing, where it was always a center-based game, and the way the rules were previously, the center was so important and so valuable that the centers were going to be the best players. And then starting with Dr. J and then moving to Jordan, the game then moves out to the wing, which also then makes it more marketable because you could say, I want to be like Mike. You can't really be like Shaq, right? They can't really be like Kareem unless you got some super potion that, some of you little fellas would love to have. If it was out there, y'all would have been on it. I don't know what y'all would have done to get that stuff. But that, I think, is a big part on why Kareem and those guys are now out of that discussion because it's not quite as interesting. Bob Ryan, who worked at the Boston Globe for many years, and I worked with Around the Horn, he always says that you need to separate basketball players, centers and non-centers, because they're not really comparable. Like, it's just hard to compare the impact that Kareem had. And there's a stronger argument for Kareem as the greatest player of all time than there is, I would say, for LeBron James. The thing about it with that Jordan dude, So I am 42 now, and I remember when I was doing radio in the late aughts of this decade, I was on the LeBron James is the best basketball player I'd ever seen, and it wasn't a ridiculous thing to say. And there's a lot of like things that you could tick off for people who have that. And then what you do is you go on YouTube and you pull up one Michael Jordan clip, and you're like, my bad, I can't believe I ever said this about anybody else. You know what I mean? Like sometimes there's a reason why everybody says the same thing. And then the numbers all bear it out and everything else. But I just ain't never seen anything like that before. Like the sky hook is so majestic and so beautiful. I watch Michael Jordan go up and other people start going down and he's still going up. Ain't nobody competing with that.
Yeah, it's a different level.
Now, I'll also say this though, in talking about Kareem and Russell, and what becomes important about them too, is neither of them took no shit off of nobody. And that does affect the way that they have been received and considered. Russell was such a winner with all those championships that that's the immutable thing that you can't really go back on. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar boycotted the 1968 Olympics, and you never really hear anything about that. Like, he got the worst of it in that he was known for having the conscience, but didn't get any credit for being any sort of pioneer, because he came around just a little bit late, so nobody can make him a hero. Like, if Jackie Robinson had come around and not been the first, I'm not sure who exactly it is that calls him a hero. They would have just found him to be annoying. But, you know, since you got to put him on a stamp, you know, now we got to dress this story up and we all got to act like we was down with it. But that, you know, that's a different dude. I mean, the story about him putting a pistol in a bus driver's mouth for treating Joe Louis bad on an Army trip. Like, the man was no joke. But Kareem doesn't get that credit, I think, in part for that reason. There's really only been one superstar caliber player truly in the NBA to push forth with that sort of social consciousness, you know, since the 70s or 80s, and that was Isaiah Thomas. And he gets zero credit for it. And it is the primary explanation for most of the scoring that he has received for the last 40 years. It's not because he doesn't like Michael Jordan, because he walked in as a rookie and looked and said, well, I don't see nearly enough black people asking me questions at these media sessions. Never let him slide for it.
I've got two more questions, then I want to open it up. But the students that we asked to provide questions in advance, there were a lot of questions about the broadcast industry, so this is kind of a composite question with that. You know, when I talk to Bill Rhoden or Howard Bryant and others, there is a conversation, and you probably got better data than me, that when black people reach the highest levels, it's very rare now that it's somebody that didn't play the game that is a journalist, and that's not necessarily the case for everybody else. And you can think of, and God bless Charles and the success he's having, and I'm looking forward to the show and all that. But is that something? Is it more difficult for us as non-athletes to find a path in your business?
Well, it definitely is now for the television. So if you watch an ESPN show now, like, I don't do television for ESPN anymore. There's nothing contentious about it. It's just kind of the way things broke. But if you look at what the setup of the shows are, you have a host, okay? You will then have athletes as analysts / experts, which, by the way, makes perfect sense. But the role that is now there for the journalist of sorts is for what they call an insider, right? That's my man Woj, Adam Schefter, those sorts of dudes. These are the guys that get the inside dirt from everybody, and then they bring it in and they provide the information that then fuels all the shows. That seat is always a white person. Like, you really stop and think about it. There's some guys that are kind of up and comers on this, like my buddy Jonathan Jones, who works at CBS. I think he's got a great future going in that direction. But that insider job is normally a white person. So that host, if it's not an NBA show, typically not going to be a person of color. So you're going to have this white person as a host, very often a woman, because everybody's got diversity goals, right? And that's the easiest way for them to solve them. Not to say that's the only way that a woman should be able to get there. I just know how people think in this business, right? That's the easiest way to do it. You have the white host, you have your athletes, you have your white insider. And that then leaves us in a space where, by and large, for black people, if you're not an athlete, I don't know how exactly you get in. If you listen to sports talk radio all across America, find out how many of the hosts are black and then see how many of them played high-level college or professional ball. It's just about all of them. Like, I was a unicorn when I was doing sports radio in that regard, because I was a host that was not an athlete. And so if you're doing a lot of this stuff because you have diversity goals, it doesn't matter who the black person is or what the black person does, just as long as you got one that you can put in front of people. Now, I don't think ESPN is necessarily looking at it that cynically, but that is how it ultimately plays out.
So my last question, I'm going to composite it as well. Should we care about the decline of black people playing baseball? And should we care about hockey?
I think that the question about whether or not you should care about any of those things is, do we really feel like doing it? Right? So let's take baseball, for example. At this point, I feel like the horse done left the barn on it. But the question is, how did the horse run away? Right? How did it get to this point? Now, to me, I think the explanation comes down to a range of factors. One of them
and I should have said African Americans.
Yes,
that's
that is correct.
Another issue.
That is correct. One thing I don't think that gets discussed enough in that is the Great Migration and the fact that we ultimately became a bit more of an urbanized population. Now, when you look at that first generation of migrants going places, you have the thriving Los Angeles black baseball scene. You've got one in Oakland. Chicago was even turning out like, your Kirby Puckett's and the likes. That first generation that was getting to these cities was still going and playing baseball. That next generation, not so much. Now, there are a couple theories. One theory that I think actually holds some water is that the difference between baseball and basketball and football was basketball and football were tickets to scholarships. Baseball was a ticket to the minor leagues. And it was a much smarter play for you to go for the scholarship than to go for the baseball move. What I also think happened after that was in line with some of what we talked about before. Okay, if the black people are now getting all the good football spots, and the black people are now getting all the basketball spots, what are all these white people gonna do? You gotta leave a couple teams open, right? There's the baseball team, right there waiting on you. But like, I'm 42, I grew up loving baseball, and there was I can't find black people to talk about baseball with. In Atlanta, where my brother growing up playing Little League, there was no difficulty finding a place where you would play the games with black people or anything like that. And then you just looked up one day, and it was all over, and it was all gone. It was just like, yo, we don't even really do this anymore. Like, you don't hear people talk about it. How exactly did it happen? And I think it's a much more fascinating question than people really want to give it credit for being. And because the question is so fascinating, that's why I do think that there's a reason to ask and be concerned about how we got to the place where we're in. Now with hockey, I raised this question. It's the same question I raised with soccer, in line with we got to leave some stuff for the white people to do. America very badly wants to be good at soccer. Very, very badly wants to be good at soccer. But they don't want to be really good at soccer, because we know when they really want to be good at something, that's when they come holla at us. Like, if you really want to be good at something, are you going to ignore 12% of your population? Probably not. With baseball, people make the argument that the black participation in baseball is tied to travel league stuff now, which is true, and that it costs so much money to go do these things and do those things. You think football free? You think them pads are free? You think them cleats are free? Right? Playing basketball, you think getting the shoes and all that stuff is free? No, but there are people who have decided it is worth it for us to invest some measure of money to make sure that these black people can participate in the sports. If they really wanted to be good at all these things, then you'd put the money in. You so afraid we gonna rob you? Get them playing soccer. They'll leave you alone. They'll be too busy running around. Like, all of these things, all these explanations that normally come up for why you fund these programs doesn't happen when it comes to soccer, in spite of the desire that everybody has for this country to be good at soccer. Now you take this to hockey. If America, which has 300 million people, wanted to be as good at hockey as Canada, which I believe has 30 million people, it's a speed game, it's a power game. People, when they get into, especially in the South, when they get into hockey, they realize, wow, it's a lot like football on ice. Football, who plays that all the time? If you really wanted to be good at it, there would be people making entrees toward us to participate just for no other reason than to get the numbers up. Now, I don't subscribe to the idea that black people are naturally more athletic, but everybody else does. So to explain the behavior, that you have to start kind of with that initial hypothesis. And so the question that you ask, and it's not one that I bang my head against the wall or march about, is if y'all want to be good, why don't y'all try? You know, and we see, like I think this dude Seth Jones, who I knew used to play for Columbus. I don't know who he plays for now, but he was Popeye Jones' son. We used to play basketball. Sorry for dating myself. Popeye Jones, former NBA basketball player. His son plays, and it feels like those kids are former athletes. Like they might go down in that direction. But I was thinking about it when the dude from Chicago, the speed skater, his name, I forget what his name was. Is that Shawnee Jones or is he the swimmer? Sorry, mixing my black people and white people sports up. Sorry about that. But speed skating. Y'all all think we fast. Why aren't we dominating speed skating? Can't nobody just come give it a brother. All that takes is a pair of skates. You don't need a stick. You don't need pads. They don't care enough to want to share this, not even enough to win, to go do this, because I think in the end, they want to make sure they got a place for their kids to play. And that's the part that we should discuss. Not even so much like, why are we not in hockey? Not, like, we should be in hockey as much as, why y'all don't want us over here? And they be fighting. That'll turn into some shit.
They're allowed to fight.
They are dudes who are on the payroll just to fight.
Just to fight. Well, let me open it up for a few questions. We have a microphone system.
Oh, we was talking about your daddy before you got here. He brought him up. That's right, son.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you had spoken a little bit earlier about how we haven't really seen a real effort on the part of players. I guess you're probably speaking about like the big four in the U.S. To sort of take away some of the power from ownership. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what objective would you expect that movement, if it exists, to pursue? Would it be more of like an interpersonal, we don't want Donald Sterling or Jerry Jones there? Or would it be more of like, we want to consolidate the power in ourselves to maybe get rid of the salary cap?
There we
something
go.
like that?
That's step one, is the salary cap. Like, it's just the most maddening notion in the world. The reason the cap exists is because these people really want to pay them, right? Like, that's the big one to me is, can you get rid of the salary cap? Now, to be fair, baseball does not have a salary cap, but at the same time, that means they do not have a salary floor, and we just basically saw them collusively stop raising salaries. And what makes that wild is, in previous generations, the single strongest labor union in the United States of America was the Major League Baseball Players Association. They won every time. Every lockout, every strike, they won because they had the resolve and they stood on it. Basketball players, football players have never won one. And Gene Upshaw had a line about, I think this is after the 1987 strike, where he said, I walked all the way up, got to the top of that hill, and when I turned around, I was by myself. And there are just so many ways that these guys get jobbed over, and especially with like healthcare type things and everything else. Like, it's those basic things. Like, before we start talking about, we're not talking about like all of a sudden your teams become co-ops that are owned by labor necessarily, no. But there's still a lot that could be done to take. There's such an investment that is required to even get there in the first place that no one is there to compensate for. And I do believe that with a little more resolve on some of these things, they could get it done. Because in the end, the players need the money, but the owner's so greedy that they treat want and need like they the same thing. And they got to miss a check, they won't.
Thank you. I'm really appreciating the talk.
Oh, thank
and
you,
just the dialogue between the both of you. But my question's around like multi-sport athletes, right? So we see within the black community, obviously kids getting kind of funneled to football or basketball, and even more so very secular. But if you look at everybody from Kyler Murray to Patrick Mahomes, guys who at least through high school and even into college, A.J. Brown, he played college baseball too, et cetera. So do you think there's a solution in pushing, whether it's coaches, parents, and eventually obviously the kids participating, into basically giving yourself more options by playing one or multiple sports, given all the issues with early specialization going on right now?
Yeah, here's the biggest thing I think about playing multiple sports, why they should be more encouraged to do so. It's fun. Now, let me throw something out there, and I think that it's some basic math that gets lost. part of why I think you had less of a push toward the professionalization of sports at these lower levels in previous years to what you have now is, so if you call it basketball in the 1960s, there were 8 teams in the league. We're talking about fewer than 100 jobs. The odds of you getting that job are very, very low. You need to go with something else. But also the money that you were going to make at that time wasn't really that high. You know, so if you're just doing just strictly expected value math on this, it's not great. But now the money is a completely different situation. There's a prospect that you could make. I think I saw Russell Westbrook has made something like $300 million in his career, right? Like there's a chance that you can make that much money. Now the chance of being Russell Westbrook is infinitesimally small. But there's a chance that you could make that much money. Or there's a chance that you could get on a team in the league, like all of these things. So we used to have 96 jobs in the NBA. Now we have 450 jobs in the NBA. It's the same thing. Like in effect, like a nation that was then probably 250 million people, there were 100 jobs. They're now 300 million people. There are 450 jobs. These odds are still really, really bad. Like I hear so much about so many people taking their kids and getting in, buying an SUV because you got to have something to take the kids to go play all these damn games on the weekend and getting a DVD player in the back so they don't go crazy. You know, all this stuff that you're doing and putting in all this grind so your kids can go do this. For what? Like if you wind up playing 1 year in the league, it's really cool for you to say, but that money gonna be gone, right? Like let's say you play for like 3 years at the NFL minimum, which is somewhere around $600,000. And so you're grossing $1.8 million. I promise you at the end of those 3 years, barely any of that money is going to be left. A, they're young people. Young people are stupid. B, you got to pay so much for all these different things on the front end, and you're going to want to spend some of that money. Why not? You're not going to stack. This isn't going to set you up for life in the ways that people talk about. And I just wish that people just did the basic math on that. And so, yeah, you can lean in on this. Well, if you want to go to the pros, this is what you got to do. Well, if you want to go to space, there's all kinds of things you got to do too, and you're just as likely to wind up there. You know, like it just doesn't add up a lot. So to me, when I hear that stuff about, we're just going to play this one sport, you're not going to do all this other stuff, man, you might as well. That's before we start getting to like the physical wear and tear that comes from just playing the same sport over and over again. And you watch what's happening in the NBA, where I think the average all-star plays 65 games this year. I think that specialization has a lot to do with it, but people are so convinced that they can will their children into success. And I'm here to tell you, athletes are born. Like there's a level up there at which there is some measure of delineation, but there's always going to be that didn't play organized ball until 11th grade guy, had the super growth spurt guy, because that's the stuff that gets you there, right? Like Michael Phelps is really good. He spent all that time in the pool getting to where he was, but the most important thing was short legs and giant feet. Katie Ledecky, short legs and giant feet. That's what you need. And you ain't gonna swim your way into those things. Like you get better after the fact, obviously. But I just think that people have done a really horrible job of evaluating the risk calculus on becoming a whatever kind of athlete you talk about. And the ones I feel bad for, man, like we're talking about these guys at Colorado, they don't grind their whole lives to try to get to this point. Then what you're supposed to do? What's next? And that's rough.
All right, first off, I want to say I appreciate being here. Everything you guys are saying was so brilliant. And the question that I have is, when you bring up Deion and some of the things that are going on in Colorado, last week I was at the Louisville spring game, and then this past week a lot of those guys hit the portal. So when you think about the portal and you look at the perspective and everything that's going on over at Colorado, I do know some of these guys personally that are hitting the portal because they're getting more money from other schools. So that brings the question that I have in mind for both of you guys. What side of the fence are you on, if any side, when it comes to like NIL, right? And college athletes being paid, and do you think that hurts the game or does it make the college game better?
All right, first of all, I did not know we were doing dangly earrings anymore. And, is that a Hauck? Oh, shit. Oh, boy. What's up, Kyrie? I see you, big dog. Don't put that on us. I mean, I'm just saying, at first I thought you had like faith. Like I thought that's where you were going with it. But instead it was the Kyrie Irving Hauck. I did not see that coming. And by the way, and to be clear, you put that on HBCU. I know enough about this city to know if somebody was wearing dangly Hauck earrings, I would have thought you went to Temple. I know enough. Who's saying wow? That's the land where the dangly Ankh earring was born. Like unless Malefi went somewhere when I wasn't looking, like this was, this is what it was. The NIL stuff, the question I have, they're getting more money. Like, how much money are we really talking about? And so, to me, if somebody's paying you like $50,000 to go here, and also to be fair, it all depends on how much you need that money, right? Like, I was not a person who was in college who had to send money to anybody else, so I don't want to have a judgment on that fact. I don't think NIL does anything really harmful to the game in that regard. Like the idea that you're going somewhere because you're going to get more money. I mean, I don't know if that's terribly different than I want to transfer from wherever it is to Stanford because Stanford's a better school. Like there's always going to be some decision that comes down to that. I just don't think that a lot of these people are getting good advice about what's important about these 4 years of your life. That's the only part that I have there is I just don't. I read something, I think it was in the Atlantic a couple of weeks ago, that was saying that when people went to college in the late 1960s, the number one reason they said they went is because they wanted to expand their mind frame, like they wanted to learn more. And post-Reagan in the deregulated 80s, the number one answer was money. And we are so focused on the idea of getting, when I got a show on HBO, people's response was, oh man, you're getting that bag. I'm like, you have no idea how much they do or do not pay, right? And that is not why I did this. I barely read the contract. I did this as a show on HBO. The idea of it was why I was doing it. It wasn't about the money of it. And my concern about the dollars and cents is just that these guys are not getting the best advice on what they need to be focused on and what is important. But at the same time, how can I tell them that they need to be loyal to staying at this place when the coach might walk in and be like, yo, buddy, you're out of here. But you can't kill kids' dreams, right? It's bad form. But you kind of got to start with this. You're not going to play professional sports. It's not going to happen. Now, if you grind it out and you make it happen, that's cool, and you can prove me wrong and everything else, but you're probably not going to play professional sports, And that's where I feel bad for them, is I think, when I see them dudes playing in the XFL, I'm like, you think you're going to turn this into that? Like, you out here taking these licks for nothing? You really think that if I just keep on going, somebody gonna see? They saw. They did.
As we get somebody else, the best thing about it is you can get a couple $100 here and there for tweeting, or $50, whatever it is. A little extra change is not a bad thing and not gonna harm anything. It is the bigger deals and the lack of guidance on making major life decisions, going from grade school to why are you there school, because you get $100,000 or whatever it might be, which is not going to impact over a lifetime where you are, as you say, except for somebody who needs to send that money home to that.
That's the one thing I always had to remember. Right. Some people need this money in a different way, and I ache for those people because the one thing children are never supposed to be is responsible for the well-being of their parents. But a lot of these dudes got to live that life. No, let me say one last thing on that. Where NIL is fascinating, though, is in the women's game. That is where the money is a bit different in women's, because the brands of colleges are so much bigger than the brands of WNBA teams. There's so much more money that they can make while in college. That's the height of their visibility. That's the most money they're ever gonna make without having to go to Russia or something like that. Yeah. No. I do think this, and I understand why I think the notion of equity can often be confused, and people need to understand you are not entitled to get rich at whatever job it is that you do. Some jobs pay more money than others. That is a job that does not pay much money. It's just what it is. After you get out of school, it is a hobby, just like every other sport other than football that people play in school. The money's not there, but while they're there, they got a chance to cash in because that is the most visible level of women's basketball in the world.
Good afternoon, everybody. I had a question, Bo. It seems like the race problem that we've dealt with for generations, the best that we've been able to muster over time is very incremental progress. And the cross-section of race in sports, what do you think are maybe some potential areas for more radical innovation?
So, as much as I have my working for a white owner or working for a black owner are the same thing, right? Like, I don't root for black ownership because basically I don't know any black person with that much money that I would ever like. But I do think, like, on the coaching level, that's where I think the players could really put in some measure of flex for something that's larger than them. Now, what they've done in football in particular, where you really have the coaching issue, what they've done is they've created casts of income. More than 50% of the league makes the minimum. Those guys can't afford to fight. Got this high level quarterbacks, make $50 million a year. What they got to fight for. Then you got the dudes in the middle just trying to keep every check that they can in the next go round. But I did a story, this is in 2020, when all the college players were making, now that's now where there's room for radical progress, these college players being like, y'all gonna actually pay us. Because NIL is a red herring in the sense. Imagine this. The NCAA figured out how to let other people pay their workers. And don't even want that. Don't even want that. Because if we're being honest, they just pimping. Like, their whole thing is, I keep them broke. They wake up with some money. They're subject to go crazy. That's their whole reason for pushing back against all the money and everything else, because now all of a sudden these boys got some flex. And, you know, they ain't trying to show up at 5 o'clock in the morning. What I'm going to do that for? You know, and everything else. I still think that college players can get their rightful due and get their rightful money, salary. Like, that, to me, will wind up being the most radical change that can come about. And I think that on that level it can happen. In the pros, there's just golden handcuffs everywhere you look. Everywhere you look. Like, you got to look yourself in the face and be like, am I turning down millions of dollars that's directly in front of me for a fight that I'm probably not going to wind up being the one to win? So, like, for example, you're never going to see 18-year-olds in the NBA ever again. There's nobody to fight for them. Like, who? I, older NBA player, member of union, sure, let's open the door for more people to take my job. Hell no, I ain't doing that. None of them are going to do that, you know? And so I think the money finally got to a point where it gets in line with the story where I was going to go with the college story, where one of the guys that was organizing said that what he learned was the only room for change, like a labor union is only useful in the event of a work stoppage. Like, if you are not willing to not go to work, you're never going to get anything. And we just haven't seen anybody just really be dedicated to, well, we ain't going to work. You know, and I think football players, if they did that for 3 games, they could change the world. But I understand why they don't. You know, it ain't for me to tell them what to do. You know, I don't need the money as bad as they do.
Hey, you mentioned Kareem boycotting the '68 Olympics. It made me think of, I think it was Harry Edwards, the revolt of the black athlete, and the power that those demonstrations can have. And I thought about the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha during the NBA bubble, and LeBron kind of flirting with this idea of striking. And then ultimately, I think he had a conversation with President Obama, and he decided not to. I'm wondering if you think that there is a responsibility for people in LeBron's position to take those steps and make those actions, or if LeBron preserves the right to just be a guy and not have to be the leader.
Well, the question I ask in response to that is, when you say LeBron's position, what do you mean?
I would say as the face of the National Basketball Association.
Got you. There's a reason why I asked that, because I think we need to view LeBron's position with a measure of nuance that gets lost by a lot of people, including LeBron James. Okay. So I would first of all like to make note that the players were getting ready to burn everything down in the bubble. And who does LeBron call? The fire department. That's what calling Obama is. He's the fire department. His whole game is, I put fires out, baby, right? Like, they're like, yo, we about to burn this down. Hey, let's not do anything hasty. It was the absolute, if you were really trying to engage in something revolutionary, the least revolutionary person in the world is who he chose to call. You can decide whether that's a judgment of Obama for yourself. It is absolutely a judgment of Obama from me. Podcast. Anyway, the thing about LeBron's position that we have to remember is LeBron James is a billionaire at this point. LeBron James is also, and this is very important, 38 years old. When you go through history and look at who the rabble-rousers have historically been, They have been people in their early to mid-20s, okay? Even Martin Luther King, by the time he gets to his mid-30s, has got Stokely and Rapp and Willie Ricks and all those dudes saying that he need to step his up. And that's the most radical revolutionary man this country has ever produced. And the next generation below him was like, nah, man, we got to go harder on this. So I mean, just stop thinking about who all those people are, at what age. Muhammad Ali was 23, I want to say, when he was doing all of those things. Muhammad Ali in his mid to late 30s is not the face of a revolution, right? That is a young person's game. What LeBron is now is a very rich man whose place, I think, in things is to do what rich people do. And I don't mean that in a bad way. He helped build a school. That's what rich people do with their money under those circumstances, right? I judge, I joke about the call on Obama, but that's the flex that he has, is that, hey, if we need to talk to a president, then I can get the president on the phone. So I think that we often look to people like him in their positions and we say, because they are in their positions, should they then have an obligation to carry forth this spirit, when the truth is, getting to that position almost disqualifies you from doing that. Because the other part of it is, LeBron got hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. What's it look like him telling you, guy who makes $1.3 million, you need to stop going to work? That guy's looking back at LeBron like, easy for you to say. So my frustration with LeBron on those things is not that he isn't more revolutionary. My problem is pretending as though you are I'm always going to say something about it, but you're not. And I get it, and I don't judge you for it. Case in point, the Tamir Rice situation in Cleveland. LeBron didn't say a mumbling word about it. And in fact, went further, not went further, but when asked about it, I haven't had a chance to read up on what's going on, and so I haven't. And so I never judged him for that. And the reason was, when he got back to Cleveland, he was such a polarizing figure that he wound up in a space similar to a space that I would say Barack Obama was in say 2009, 2010, where once he jumps in, it becomes about him. It doesn't become about the issue, and it does not bring attention to it. It actually distracts, and it becomes, should LeBron have said anything? And we're not talking about this young man. However, don't tell me that if there's something to say, I'm going to say it, and you don't say nothing about a 12-year-old getting smoked in your own city by the cops doing like who riding, basically. Don't tell me those two things at once. It's okay if you pick your spots. I don't blame you. I don't judge you. But he is a man in a position that is always going to require him to pick his spots.
One last question.
Yeah, we can get a couple more. My train will lead to late 30.
All right. Thank you.
Two last questions.
Yeah, thank you for a great chat. My question surrounds Ivy League sports. So, what do you think about Ivy League sports on a national stage, and do you see any opportunities for Black athletes to kind of start getting student positions, student athlete scholarships? I don't know if they do scholarships, but scholarships at Ivy League.
Well, yeah, that's the thing with Ivy League sports that become interesting, is that it is a no scholarship league. But, all these people looked up one day and were like, wow, we really have so much money, we don't actually have to charge tuition. Maybe we should stop charging people tuition who can't afford it, right? And we've seen this happen at a few places, which wound up with some wild stuff happening in the Ivy League, though, with people having real questions about some of the folks who get in and do not get in, and basically whether you're sneaking ringers in there, all right? And it kind of, for a lot of people, takes away from the spirit of it. That year that Harvard won the game in the tournament when Tommy Amaker was there, and their team just looked like a team, I didn't hear about it the way I did when Cornell went to the Sweet 16 that year. I ain't hear about it like I did when Princeton had their most recent win, because they looked too much like a basketball team and not enough like Harvard. But what I've said about the Ivy League, and we did something on game theory about HBCUs in season 1, where I felt like the HBCUs, rather than looking at themselves as trying to become football factories comparable to Alabama and the likes, the Ivy League model, I think, is a much more sustainable one, where the concern really is playing against each other, right? Like, just playing against each other and using sports as a way to give some opportunities to people that may have otherwise not received it. And so there's always going to be, no matter what it is, anything that is a discriminating factor that doesn't have to do with sports is going to make it harder. And so being able to get into an Ivy League school, even with some concessions, is going to make it difficult for you to get like great athletes. But you can do great things for the athletes while they are there. And that is the thing that I find somewhat admirable, if nothing else, about like the sporting context of the Ivy League, is that if they're doing it right, they could be in a position to do some really, really, really good things for the athletes themselves. Now, for those who don't know, when John Thompson was at Georgetown, his whole thing was, I only want players who couldn't get into Georgetown already. I am opening the door to Georgetown to people who would otherwise not have this opportunity to do that. It would be cool if on some of these sports, somebody chose that that was the approach that they were going to take. It's not terribly dissimilar to what John Chaney did at Temple. It would be cool. It also might be a little too revolutionary for these schools to do it in that way. You know, the Jesuits have their mission. These ain't Jesuit schools.
I could just ask, so what competitive, you know, like if you were the athletic director of Penn and you were thinking, how can we have a more supportive sports program, what advice would you have?
You know, if somebody was dumb enough to put me in charge, I mean, it would be a hell of a year, you know. But Kelly and I were talking on the way over here about a stat that he had seen that I didn't realize, that there's something like, of all these schools in Philadelphia, that something like fewer than 2,000 students from Philadelphia public schools attend them, which is just staggering, you know, like just a wild number for me to hear. If you put me in charge of this one, I'm not recruiting anybody that I can't get to on what y'all call it, the SEPTA. I ain't recruiting nobody. I don't need to. Like, you could make a decision that this is our give back, right? It doesn't have to be every sport, but it could, you pick one. It could be, you know, I know the basketball program at Penn has been fairly strong over time, but that would be the way that I would go about this. Like, I really found it admirable, and I don't love John Thompson, the legacy of John Thompson, as much as other people do. There's room for criticism there. But that idea that he had is strong. And if you put somebody in one of these positions, like with Chaney, with the exception of that other guy we don't talk about anymore, Chaney is, for me, what you think of when you think about Temple, right? And look, we were talking about this too. I thought Temple was a black college growing up. Their court had volleyball lines on it. You know, like I thought that this was an HBCU, but it was because of Chaney. It's because of the players that he brought in and the way he used that program and, you know, in the relationship that it had with the city. There's nothing stopping this school from doing the same thing if they wanted to, if people wanted to get behind it in that way. I mean, they not, but it would be cool.
Do you have any thoughts regarding Lamar using family members or whoever he's using versus a traditional agent?
Yo, so here's the thing about the Lamar agent discussion. And it's not easy to explain it to people who don't traffic in spaces that require agents. And I think that people think that having an agent is, I got this guy, he calls, he negotiates my contract, and then he gets a percentage off of that contract. The way I've always looked at it is this. One, I have an agent, so who am I to tell Lamar Jackson that he should not have an agent? It's not a discussion about whether or not he is smart enough to handle this himself. Like, with all due respect, I might be smarter than Lamar Jackson, and I have an agent, right? What my agent does is take phone calls with people that I don't feel like talking with. What my agent does is have conversations that I don't need to be in the room for. Like, my agent always tells me, I've never brought you a first offer once, because the first offer is going to offend me. The first offer is going to have me feeling insulted, because that's the game. That's how it goes. Fonte Coleman once told me many years ago about his agent, and I quote, you need somebody that can call them a motherfucker from time to time. You can't do that. You need somebody who can, right? And so when I look at it for Lamar, I'm glad he got his money. But I also know this, and this is literally the truth. There were teams that were trying to like get him in when he was in the draft for workouts and stuff like that. They couldn't get nobody to call him back. Because what time does Lamar Jackson have to be fielding all these phone calls and setting up a schedule and doing all this stuff? He doesn't have time. Like, Never underestimate the value of a professional. I could pack up all my stuff at my house too. It'll take me a lot longer than it'll take when these movers come in here and it's a symphony of tape and cardboard, So just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. So in the name of just the stress of your life, for me, it would have been worth the 3% to not have to be the person who engaged in all of this stuff, to have somebody to do the media warfare for me. That would have been worth the money to do it for me, right? And I've talked to enough people where I feel like the real issue with him is he's really just being cheap. They just don't want to pay the 3%. Like, this isn't a revolution. This isn't taking back, fighting the machine or anything else. I just don't think they want to pay the 3%. So yeah, it sounds like he got a pretty good deal. Who's to say he could have got a better one? I don't have the answer to that one. I just know for me, myself personally, I would not want the stress of having to negotiate my whole contract all by myself. So good for him if he got it done. But yeah, I don't have that kind of time. And I don't make nearly as much money as he does. But good for him, he got his money. I tried to explain to people. People were just so sure that he was going to have to back down off of this and that they weren't, they was going to take whatever their first offer was. Like the Ravens had another option. Like, who was going to play quarterback for them if it wasn't him? It might have been Odell Beckham. He might have been the best quarterback they had if they didn't bring Lamar back. So I was glad that he stood strong. But yeah, I'd have got somebody and paid them that 3%.
Big fan, Bomani. Wanted to say that. Let's do a little role play here. Let's just say you happen to
be. It better be a little role play.
Yeah. Let's just say you were a fan of the 76ers. Looks like we're about to get an MVP out of Embiid, but other than that, that whole process thing that we went through, anything short of a championship, would you be completely disappointed in that, or would you say that these winning seasons were enough? If you were a 76ers fan?
Well, the question becomes about that process. And I used to do a television show with a process devotee. It's just a real McKinsey Bain Capital approach to basketball. And when's that ever been a good thing? We're going to devalue this thing all the way so we can build it up and then sell it, right? I mean, that's basically what the Sixers did. I don't think that, nothing short of a championship is success, as an outlook, is generally appropriate. I also try to be careful delineating it with the process because all the people behind that aren't there anymore, so the ones who are here are not worth it. But the process itself, as it was described, was the single most embarrassing run an NBA team has ever had. It's the most pathetic thing that anybody has ever done because it wasn't just that they were bad. They were so intentionally bad where they weren't even getting dudes that they thought had NBA futures. And then the ones who did, like Christian Woods on one of those teams, there's a couple others that you could point to, they didn't even keep those guys because they would have been too good, right? And so now they got Embiid, which, by the way, they got lucky for because they wanted the number 1 pick, and they wound up with the 3rd, so they had to take the dude with the broken foot, or broken back, I think he had coming out at that time, in order to make it work. They got lucky there. So, no, I think that consistently having a good basketball team is what you should hope for. That's generally where I am. But if I had to spend 3 or 4 years watching that terribleness that you had to watch, yes, I would like to have a little bit more on the back end if I were you guys. But the other argument on the process is it would have been, for lack of a better term, successful if that one guy didn't completely fall apart. I mean, if Ben Simmons turns into what you thought Ben Simmons could have been or would have been, we're not having the discussion that we're having right now. But he didn't. Now, there's also, way to go, Charlie, Local 4, there's some other bad decisions along the way. I don't even want to bring up Fultz because I don't think it was his fault. But, one thing I do like about this city as it relates to sports is it's not a championship or bust city. It's a play hard city, and you're good with that. And Embiid gives that to you, right? You're happy with that part. But if I was him, when they were running the offense through Harden at the beginning of the year, I'd have been like, man, get me the hell out of here.
Thank you. Huge fan, CAU, Morehouse. So.
Wait a minute, let's be clear. I went to CAU.
I went to Morehouse.
I mean, I wouldn't say that out loud, but
wow. Well, anyway, I was trying my brother.
I know what you was trying to do. I needed to let you know. It's
so much for that.
ATL, something.
It still ain't that sweet, but it's all good.
I'll go get a dangling earring. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was about to say they would have kicked Ron Johnson out of Morehouse for bringing in that dangling Hauck.
No, but I want to, you touched briefly on baseball, and you kind of said about the traveling teams and why African Americans aren't playing baseball anymore. And I feel like it's more of a cultural thing. It's not a part of our culture, meaning that my grandfather played, my dad played, I played, and then stopped playing because of the heroes went to basketball and the crowds went to basketball. I'm also a preacher's kid, so I can remember all the church picnics, everybody's playing baseball. And then it switched. Heroes, Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden. I mean, if you could throw, you want to be like Doc, and then so forth and so on. So do you think that we as African Americans just, the culture shifted and that's why?
Well, I think the culture part is fair. Like, I think the rise of, Michael Jordan is a big factor in this. I do think that that's a fair question to ask. Like, how to test that hypothesis, I don't have the greatest answer for. But like I say, my grandfather played, my daddy played baseball, I played baseball. And I don't have any kids, but how and when the inflection point comes up is what I'm like most curious about. It's like when exactly this went down and why the change happened as it did. But also, it is worth noting, the rate or the percentages of white baseball players in the majors has been pretty constant. What's happened is what was African Americans are now the dudes that they can get from out of the United States. And the big thing was they could get them without them going through the draft process. They could get them a lot cheaper. And the belief, at least, I want to be careful about saying this definitively, seen as being more compliant. And so it is hard for me to believe that what happened was we quit baseball before baseball quit us. And I think that baseball definitely did a lot to quit us. I also think this is something else worth considering there. When I was talking about the fast white dudes and being all around white dudes, part of what's so interesting about black baseball players that generation is they all grew up around black people. Now, let's say you're the athletic director at some high school and you got your budget and you got to figure out what to do with this money. And as basketball is rising and basketball makes more money. That's the thing. Baseball don't really make nobody money on the youth level. It makes everybody. Basketball and football make everybody money there. So they're going to put the money there. So like Vince Young, when he was in high school, he played baseball at James Madison High School in Houston. By me telling you that the name of it is James Madison High School in Houston, you can tell a lot about what the budgetary situation probably was over there. How much money you think they putting over there in that baseball program? They barely putting together the football program, and they had the greatest player in the history of the state over there. And so I don't know for black institutions how much money they got to invest over there in baseball, and then how does that then trickle down and affect everything else? But you are right, I think, in the sense that the culture has changed, and that's why I raised the question about the Great Migration and how those migration patterns then change. Like, where are you going to play baseball in Chicago at this point? What's wild is in Atlanta, like where my brother used to play baseball, that's a driving range now. Like, it ain't just about going to basketball, you know? If you ever read Nelson George's The Death of Rhythm and Blues, he has this hypothesis that black people kind of gave up the guitar because with the urbanization, the guitar was seen as a link back to the South and that they were trying to move past that. And I wonder to a degree if baseball is seen in a similar fashion by some of those people that, we have left that behind, that basketball is definitely a more urban game. So I think there's lots of questions about it. I just always feel like the people who are at least purportedly looking for the answers for it aren't nearly as curious. Let me tell you about what they ain't never gonna make another one of ever again. That is the one of one, boy. Like it's wild. As great as all the athletes have become, we got more great athletes than ever. We still only got one of those. Y'all know who Bo Jackson is, right?
Well, that might be the right place to end it.
One of y'all don't know who Bo Jackson is.
Google it. Right?
Yeah. It's you, isn't it?
Camille.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank Bomani Jones for joining us for this important discussion, Professor Ken Shropshire for guiding the conversation. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us and that you might come through again sometime. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our partners, the Wharton Sports Analytics and Business Initiative and the Wharton Coalition for Equity and Opportunity. This is our last public event of the year, and so I'd also like to take a moment to thank the staff of the Center for Africana Studies, Kelly Harris, Tia Campbell, Audra Rogers, and Isaiah Gaiman, and our student workers as well, for an extremely busy and vibrant year of programming. We really can't do what we do without them, and it means even more to me that we were able to reboot one of my favorite annual programs this year. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. We know it's a busy time of the year. There are all kinds of things you could have been doing, and we appreciate that you chose to spend your time with us. So thanks again, and everybody have a great evening.
Ooh, can I say one last thing?
Yes.
As you just said that, and I think about it, I want to say thank you myself to Kelly, and I want to bring up, kind of as we were talking about tradition, as we talked about Ralph Wiley, and Ralph's son Cole is here. You missed all the good talk, but Cole just happens to be here.
I missed 2 flights to get here.
Oh man, I'm just saying. But I just want to make sure you know. But the reason this is important, Kelly, one of his professors in graduate school was my father. And so a large part of why I am here is because Kelly reached out. I did a talk at Chicago State a few years ago to do that. And there is, and I don't know how much this goes down now in academia where things are a bit more spread out, but there's a connection that comes from all of us who have been in these worlds and have known each other. And a part of what's important about all of this is maintaining those connections and then spreading from where we have in the first place, right? So like for me, this is school. I am talking at an Ivy League school. Like that's not a small thing for me. And it happens because Kelly calls me and asks me to do that, and we have that connection. And by the same token, I am here because I have this connection with Kelly. And this can put, like, those of us who are in these spaces where there are but so many of us and but so many real ones, keep that part in mind. Like, you know, some of them I don't think you need to hang out with. But it becomes important for us to do that kind of sharing and to share those stories. And so for Ken to bring up Ralph and for me to be able to have the opportunity to recommend those things or whatever, when you do get these chances, that's what we got to do. Because there are a lot of great people. Like just about a month or so ago, they named the political science department at Clark Atlanta after my father, which was a very big thing. And those of you familiar with Adolph Reed Jr., who I know worked here for many years, my father was one of his advisors. Like, these are the connections that are there and that exist that can be real easy for us to forget if we don't talk about them. And so I want to thank Kelly and also just all those people who put me and Kelly together, because it's a big world that got us here, you know, to this place. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.